Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. Hungary's prime minister caves to pressure from the European Union to infuse Ukraine with another 50 billion euros. That is equivalent to about 53 billion in US dollars, and that money will go toward Ukraine's public services for the next 4 years. Public services like paying for doctors, teachers, and of course for soldiers. Viktor Orban had been the lone holdout on the deal for months, until Brussels put together a blackmail operation to concoct an offer he couldn't refuse. The plan included getting EU leaders to freeze all funding to Budapest to exacerbate the country's problems with inflation and debt, unless Orban relented. Now that the EU has gotten in its way, they are trying to accuse Orban of attempting to blackmail them. Probably because of this big headline from the Financial Times earlier this week, headlined, Hungary vows to defy EU blackmail over Ukraine funding. Brussels has considered ways to sabotage Hungarian economy unless Budapest agrees on aid for Kyiv. So perhaps as part of their damage control, these EU leaders are trying to reclaim the term blackmail. So they want us to believe that this giant and powerful bloc of nations, that they were held at the mercy of one tiny little country that they all gang up on, instead of it being the other way around. It does boggle the mind, especially when the French president, Emmanuel Macron, had the nerve to call Hungary a Kremlin-friendly country. Europe honestly has a death wish at this point. It's like no country's allowed to have national interests anymore. We all have to commit cultural and national suicide at the altar of liberal ideas. But not everyone wants to play ball. Some leaders actually take seriously their oath of office to protect their own people's best interests first and foremost. What a novel idea. Joining us now to discuss is Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell, the president of the Counterpoint Institute. Dr. Shea, thanks for being here tonight.
Hey, Kara, how are you doing?
Great. So what do you make of this blackmail scheme against Hungary by the EU?
I would take it further than blackmail, Kara. I would say it's extortion, because blackmail implies that Hungary has done something wrong, and all the Hungarian prime minister has done is what the will of the people is. They have been very clear, the people have, that they don't want to enable an ongoing war in Ukraine. They're all for humanitarian assistance. I've been in the Ukraine refugee center in Hungary, and I know that they took in 3.5 million refugees from Ukraine, many of whom have moved to other countries now. They don't want illegal immigration in their country, another thing the EU is pushing on them, and they don't want the radical gender theory that the EU is also pushing. Also, Kara, I would really say that this was a victory for Orban, because he stood up for sovereignty of Hungary. Hungary will not have any of their funds now going towards the war. The EU members, they're welcome to do with their money whatever they want to. And the other thing is he got them to agree to put accountability measures in place where they will review the funds, where the funds are going at the end of the first and second year. I mean, imagine that. That's what I wish our government would do to find out where our money is going.
Oh, definitely. And this has been a recurrent theme. So like you said, Prime Minister Viktor Orban deserves a lot of plaudits for holding out for as long as he did, despite all the pressure being hurled at him. And he was still able to get some victories for his country as well in the midst of all this. But as you were laying out a moment ago, and the last time I had you on, we were talking about your new book, right? And about how Hungary really, there's a message that we in the rest of the West, in the U.S., should be taking away and learning from them. So can you also, just for our audience, to catch them up to speed on how Hungary has been, kind of going at it with Brussels for really some time now?
Yes, and the big three issues that I just mentioned are also explained in my book, and why Hungary doesn't want these. Hungary is a conservative nation, the majority of them. They're a Christian nation. And what the European Union has been trying to do to them is to push the same so-called progressive woke agenda on them that the Biden administration is trying to push on us. Our ambassador over there, embarrassingly so, is very antagonistic, undiplomatic to Hungary, who is our NATO ally, as well as a member of the EU. So there's a lot of reasons that we should watch Hungary and see how they have dug their heels in. I think that they go against the mainstream woke agenda Very well. I think they do it even with charm, but they uphold the will of their people. On all three of those issues that I mentioned, there have been citizen referendums that were held. And, different issues, it's like between 80 and 90 something percent of the people have pushed back on illegal immigration, radical gender theory, and enabling an ongoing war in Ukraine, which I happen to agree with as well. So the point is, they're a sovereign nation, and the EU should stop meddling in their affairs. And quite frankly, the Biden administration should stop meddling as well.
Does that really, expose a lot of the lies about globalism? That the EU, for example, they'll say, well, you have to support us in this big, gigantic 50 billion euro aid package for Ukraine because we have to help protect what? Like you were saying, the key word, their sovereignty, their independence against Russia. But the same point, on the flip side of that, they'll look at Hungary and say, if you don't agree with us fully, we're going to try and destroy your economy. We're going to try and squash you. We're going to try and basically gut you until you go along with what we're saying. How is that allowing sovereignty, right? I mean, none of that makes sense. So it starts to show.
You're extremely right. I mean, very ironic to say the least. But it's exactly what the Biden administration does to America. He won't close our border, but he wants almost $200 billion to send to Ukraine. It makes absolutely no sense. And what he's trying to do with the Senate border deal is to codify his open border policies into law. Now, explain that. Ukraine's borders are important, and I believe in their sovereignty. But are our borders not more important than another country's? That's America first. And to go back to Prime Minister Orban, that's his point. Foreign policy should be Hungary first and Hungary. It should be America first and America. And then we can start from there and go forward to collaborate.
That's also the thing with a lot of these international coalitions and organizations and the rest is they want us to pretend that national interests don't exist and that they don't matter. And of course, that's not true. The Ukraine war, by various accounts, even by former German chancellors and others, say that war there could have been a negotiated settlement not long after the Russian invasion, but it seemed like the US and the UK wanted it to continue further. They wanted to use the war in Ukraine to weaken Russia. But by the same token, though, a lot of nations in Europe, they need the oil, they need the natural gas, and so it's hard for them to try and cut that off. And then so the U.S. should say, well, we'll provide the energy, but now what did Biden just do the other week? He wants to, put the pause on new LNG liquefied natural gas export terminals. And a lot of our allies in Europe said, wait a second, we bought and paid for it, and we were expecting that natural gas we needed to also be able to get away from Russia's natural gas. So we've really shot ourselves in the foot because it's like national interests don't exist anymore. And it's just the altar of liberal ideas we have to sacrifice ourselves to.
Yeah, and what I wanted to say, Kara, is you're talking exactly about Prime Minister Viktor Orban's point. They didn't want to fund the war, first of all, because, they went against the sanctions against Russia because, first of all, they're reliant on Russian energy just like Europe is. And their infrastructure even is Soviet era. So he did not want to crush his economy because of this war going on. And, the second thing is over 400,000 Ukrainians have been killed. I spent about 3 months in Central Europe last year, and you can see the real news there, that the infrastructure is devastated. That, in the words of the Wall Street Journal, actually, I believe it was a high-level media outlet, there are horrific casualties. And Russia is not going to stop. We don't have the national interest in this war that some of these politicians are trying to sell us. They say that Putin will come, against all of us. Really? Because Putin can't get out of 4 provinces in Ukraine. Is he going to come against 31 NATO countries? I don't think so. So we've got to be smart about this. And, Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona says he is absolutely certain that Biden's financial ties to Ukraine is why he is so obsessed with funding this war. And I think there's other financial interests for other people in funding this war, such as, dare I say it, Nikki Haley.
I think so as well. And that's also the thing is it seemed that the U.S. last year, at least, right, that was the headlines in the going fall into winter of last year, that the U.S. was putting pressure on Ukraine to say, okay, let's try and have you guys work at some settlement with Russia. But then on the other side of things, you see that the Democrats and Biden administration are still pushing for big dollar amounts to Ukraine. That, of course, is being held up right now in Congress, but they still want to give that money. So it's kind of a lot of conflicting signals from the State Department. Victoria Nuland was just in Ukraine this past week. So before I let you go tonight, Dr. Shea, what is the U.S.'s position now on Ukraine? Because on the one hand, it seemed they wanted to wind it down and then look towards the Middle East, where Iran's making a lot of noise. But then on the other hand, it seems that they're still, trying to keep it going as they have been this last year or two.
Yeah, I have seen no real indication from the Biden administration, from the president, or from Congress, really, to draw back on funding for Ukraine. I believe that that's why they tied it to the border, to Taiwan, to Israel, because they want to, I guess, kind of go under the radar to continue to give more funding to Ukraine, to tie it to these other interests. It's political gamesmanship. I think it's very unwise. I think we need to secure our border. This border deal that's up right now, if we could read the text of it, I know from what is leaked is not a good deal for us. It will codify these open border policies. We've got to take care of our country because we are in a very precarious position. Much of that is due to Joe Biden's lack of foreign policy.
No, that's exactly right. Dr. Shea, thanks so much for joining us tonight.